Thunder rumbled across the dusty plains as the crowd gathered under the ragged tent. The air crackled with tension, whiskey, and desperation. High-stakes cold eyes and the relentless western sun set the stage for an act so cruel it bordered on the unthinkable. A bride auction. Among the onlookers stood Lucas "Lucky" McGinty, an outlaw with a price on his head and guilt scrawled across his conscience. He had come to buy freedom for his sins, a last gamble he never expected to take. And she was there, trembling on the splintered block eyes, filled with timid hope. Their fates collided at that very moment. The makeshift platform had been erected at the edge of a dusty street in Broken Spur, a sun-scorched frontier town that seemed to teeter on the border between lawlessness and civility. The permanent residents numbered only a few dozen, but travelers and drifters, some following the railroad. Others, the promise of gold or cheap land, passed through every day. On that particular afternoon, the entire settlement seemed to crowd around the platform, drawn by grim curiosity and the murmur of scandal. Lucas "Lucky" McGinty stood near the back of this gathering. He was a lanky figure with broad shoulders, dressed in a threadbare long coat he had inherited from a man he would rather not name. His revolver, a Colt single-action army, hung low on his right hip in a well-worn holster. A battered black hat sat angled on his head, casting a dark shadow over eyes that had seen too much. The townspeople parted for him involuntarily, the aura of his presence enough to unsettle them. News travelled quickly in Broken Spur, and rumours of Lucas's rumoured misdeeds had fluttered around like tumbleweeds in a windstorm. He wasn't used to being here, not in the sense of physically standing among people, but in the sense of being a buyer at an auction for a bride he knew nothing about. Bride auctions were whispered about in hushed tones, so unsavoury that even the rowdiest saloons scorned the practice. Yet desperation sometimes meant profit for unscrupulous souls, and Broken Spur's morally ambiguous terrain made it a ripe place for opportunists. The old auctioneer, known only as Grady, cleared his throat, his voice echoing over the hush. "Folks, gather round, gather round." He wiped sweat from his temple with a crumpled cloth. "We got ourselves a fine young lady here, obedient, docile, eager to please. Who'll start the bidding?" Standing on the platform was Clara Thompson, a young woman who looked as though the wind could blow her away. She wore a second-hand dress that had once been green, but was now closer to grey. Dust and tears stained the hem. A cloak of timid resignation weighed on her shoulders, and her eyes darted around, settling on no one face too long for fear of what she might see in their expression. Lucas thought of turning away. The notion of buying a bride like livestock disgusted him, but the whisper of his past had guided him here. Repeated guilt-laced nightmares, the spectre of his lost family, and the gnawing sense he was on the path to a blood-soaked end made him crave some form of redemption. He believed, however oddly, that helping this girl might be a step toward atonement. And who was he fooling? Some small part of him, the part that believed in new beginnings, yearned to build a life with someone. Perhaps she too needed a second chance. "Let's start at $50. Shall we?" Grady called out. But the crowd shifted uncomfortably. $50 was a large sum. Then, from the front row, a man with a silver-tipped cane and a scowl on his pock-marked face raised his hand. Lucas recognized that scowl. The man was Silas Barnes, a rancher known for running his cattle hands into the ground and for rumored cruelty to the hired help. Clara's eyes flicked toward Silas's cane, and she shrank slightly as though imagining his wrath. No one else moved. Lucas touched the handle of his revolver lightly, not in a threatening way, but in an instinctual gesture. He had earned his money through grim deeds, bounty-hunting gunfights, some borderline robberies, and he was not proud of the blood that stained his hands. But if he didn't act, this girl would become Silas's property. He hated the idea of belonging to anyone, let alone such a man. His hand shot up. $60. Silas's face twisted in scorn. 70. Lucas's heart pounded. He knew the money in his pocket wouldn't last, but damnation was worth risk. 80. 90. Silas showed no intention of stopping. Lucas clenched his jaw. He thought of the men he'd gunned down, the innocents he'd ignored in times of trouble. The pang of regret flared in his chest. 100. Silas paused. The onlookers around him murmured. $100 for a bride was unthinkable to many. Even Grady's eyes flickered with surprise. The crowd grew silent, waiting for Silas to counter. The tension built until it snapped beneath Silas's lips, curling with a sneer. He dropped his cane to the ground. "Fine. She ain't worth that much to me," he spat. "Keep her, you scoundrel." A moment of disbelief followed. Then Grady, not wanting to lose the momentum, slammed his gavel onto the platform. Sold. For $100 to Lucas McGinty. Clara's head snapped up in alarm and relief all at once. Lucas forced his shoulders not to slump. Part of him wasn't sure if he'd made the right decision or not. But it was too late. He had chosen, and now she belonged to him. The thought churned in his gut, leaving him queasy. He vowed on the spot to never treat her like property. When Lucas stepped up, he paid Grady in blood-spattered bills. Guilt stung him anew at the sight of the dark specks on the currency reminders of how he had come by them. Clara offered a timid curtsy, her lips quivering. He nodded gently, offering her his arm, and she accepted with trembling fingers. Amid the murmurs of the crowd, they walked away together, a newly minted husband and his shy young bride. Little did Lucas know the woman by his side was far more important to his redemption than he could have ever imagined. Lucas led Clara down Broken Spur's single dusty road. The afternoon sun threw their shadows long across the dirt. In a place where life was harsh and hope seemed as brittle as the wooden planks of the dilapidated buildings, they formed an odd pairing. A stoic outlaw and a trembling bride. They reached a modest boarding house run by a pious widow named Mrs. Harriet Ardner. The building had chipped paint and a sagging front porch, but it was one of the few places in town that offered a bed without too many questions. Lucas had an arrangement with Mrs. Gardner, forged through several nights of quiet lodging and a small measure of trust. She didn't ask about his misdeeds. He didn't offer confessions. When he introduced Clara, Mrs. Gardner's gaze softened. She was in her 50s, with wiry grey hair pinned in a tight bun. "Poor dear," she murmured gently, guiding Clara inside. "Make yourself at home. I'll draw you a bath in a spell." Lucas followed behind them, unsure of how to act. He'd dealt with thieves, murderers, and lawmen, but a timid bride was entirely foreign territory. Clara slipped her hand from his arm the moment they entered the parlor, stepping toward a rocking chair by the window. Mrs. Gardner, reading the unspoken tension, ushered them upstairs and pointed out a simple bedroom with a double bed, a worn rug, and a single oil lamp. Light streamed through a cloudy window that overlooked the corral behind the boarding house. Clara hesitated at the doorway. She glanced at the bed, then at Lucas, her cheeks coloring in embarrassment. The question hung in the air. What arrangement was expected? As if reading her mind. Lucas scratched the stubble on his chin. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said brusquely, tossing his hat onto a small wooden table. "I'd never force anything on you." She managed a small nod of gratitude, her expression softening. "Thank you." She whispered, her voice so quiet he had to strain to catch the words. Left alone together, the silence between them grew thick. He watched her fingers trace the wooden bedpost, her gaze drifting across the worn quilt. He realized she owned almost nothing. A small reticule, likely containing a change of clothes, and a few personal items was slung over her shoulder. Everything else, her future, her security, was up in the air. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Lucas said after a moment. "No one should be sold off like that. Not ever." She turned her gaze to him, and for the first time he saw a spark of something in her eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, or a timid curiosity. "I'm grateful," she replied, her voice trembling only slightly now. "I was sure Silas Barnes would take me. And he is not a good man." Lucas nodded grimly. "He's the type that has no respect for life. I've known his kind before." They settled into a wary calm. Mrs. Gardner soon returned with a steaming kettle and bucket for the wash basin. She fussed over Clara, instructing her to take her time. Lucas politely stepped into the hallway to give Clara privacy. In that lonely corridor, the guilt of what he had done and who he had been nagged at Lucas. He recalled how just a few days prior, a drunken gambler in the Lucky Dime saloon had recognized him and tried to collect the bounty on his head. Lucas's bullet had found the man's shoulder, but it could just as easily have been his heart. Maybe Lucas thought that Gambler was out there somewhere, with a bandaged wound and a thirst for revenge. Sooner or later, a storm would come for him. He couldn't keep drifting from town to town forever on the run. Maybe by some miracle, this new arrangement would offer him a path out of the darkness. It was a foolish hope, but in these desperate times, hope was better than nothing. The next morning, Lucas rose early, stepping silently, so as not to disturb Clara, who was curled under the quilt. He'd slept on the floor, but it was better than some lonely nights out on the range. He ventured downstairs to find a hearty breakfast of biscuits, gravy, and sausage courtesy of Mrs. Gardner. As he ate, a familiar face sidled up to him, Jeb Mulligan, the local blacksmith. Jeb was a bear of a man, with a wiry beard and an easy grin. He eyed Lucas with caution. "Heard you got yourself a wife," he said, leaning his massive elbows on the table. "Didn't figure you was the marrying type." Lucas shrugged. "Didn't figure so myself. Sold her for $100, they say." Jeb gave a low whistle. "She must be something special, or you must be half crazed." "Probably both." Lucas frowned, anger flickering in his eyes. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't about to let Silas Barnes claim her." Jeb studied him for a moment, then clapped a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Well, guess you done the right thing. Some might even call it heroic." He paused, letting the words settle. "Got to tell you, though, Silas is mighty sore about it. Word is, he's aiming to cause trouble." Lucas nodded grimly, a twinge of worry forming in his gut. "Let him come. I'm not afraid of him." "That's what I figured," Jeb replied. Then, lowering his voice, I heard Wyatt Earps passing through Dodge City might head down this way. "Some folks say he's coming to crack down on criminals drifting around these parts. You keep your nose clean, Lucas." You hear me? Is that a warning, Jeb? Maybe, Jeb rumbled, glancing around. I've heard your name in hushed tones. Some say you done things. If Earp or any of his men catch wind, you might be in a heap of trouble. Don't let your new bride get tangled in your past. Lucas swallowed hard. The mention of Wyatt Earp, the storied lawman, felt like a cold wind cutting through him. He had no illusions about what would happen if Earp locked horns with him. I appreciate the heads up, he said softly. When Lucas returned to the bedroom, he found Clara already dressed in her plain dress. She stood by the window, watching the morning sun gild the horizon. He cleared his throat gently to announce his presence. She turned, offering a shy half-smile. It was the first time he'd seen anything resembling peace on her face. "I'd like to see if I can find work," she said, surprising him. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said quickly. "But if you want to work, that's your choice. There's a seamstress in town, Miss Addy, who might be able to use an extra pair of hands." Clara nodded. "Thank you. I can sew well enough." Her eagerness to find a sense of purpose touched Lucas more than he cared to admit. He recognized that she wasn't just a helpless victim. She was determined to stand on her own feet. They left together. As they wandered through Broken Spur, the townsfolk offered curious stares, some of them nodding politely, others eyeing Lucas with distrust. Clara clung to Lucas's arm, not out of romantic affection, but more from an instinct of self-preservation. When they reached Miss Addy's small sewing shop, a cramped space filled with bolts of fabric and half-finished dresses, Clara timidly explained her desire for employment. Miss Addy, a petite woman with spectacles perched on her nose, offered Clara a trial with wages to be discussed if the arrangement worked out. "I can start immediately," Clara said, glancing at Lucas for confirmation. He nodded, stepping outside so they could finalize details without him looming over them. As he waited, Lucas leaned against a hitching post, trying to ignore the stares of passers-by. He saw Silas Barnes sauntering down the boardwalk, flanked by two rough-looking ranch hands. Silas caught Lucas's eye and sneered, tipping his hat mockingly. A silent threat simmered between them. Eventually, Clara emerged, a faint gleam in her eyes. "She said to come by every day in the morning," she said. "I'll be sewing hems and mending clothes." "That's good," Lucas said softly. "I'll find work of my own. Any money I have won't last forever." "Will you stay in town?" she asked, uncertain. Lucas paused. For years he drifted from one place to the next, never planting roots. But now, with Clara under his protection, he realized that running from his ghosts might only endanger her. "I'll stay," he said, "at least for a while. Maybe for good, if they'll have me." The corners of Clara's mouth lifted in a small but hopeful smile. Neither of them knew the challenges ahead. Silas's grudge, Lucas's dark past, or the unstoppable approach of law and order. But for the moment, in the gentle morning light, they found solace in each other's presence. Days passed, and a shaky routine emerged. Clara left early to work at Miss Addy's shop, while Lucas looked for odd jobs in town, repairing fences, unloading cargo at the general store, even helping with stable duties. He took whatever paid, no matter how menial earning, just enough to keep them fed and pay for Mrs. Gardner's room. Word spread quickly that the outlaw was turning over a new leaf. Some folks, like Jeb the blacksmith, nodded with grudging respect. Others remained suspicious. They had seen men pretend to change before, only to revert to their wicked ways when times got tough. Clara worked diligently under Miss Addy's watchful eye, her quiet determination winning the older woman's favor. Soon, Clara's skill with a needle proved so impressive that Miss Addie let her take home special commissions. One evening, Clara showed Lucas an intricate lace trim she had sewn on a bride's wedding veil. He found himself marveling at her skill, realizing that behind those timid eyes lay true talent. In the midst of this mundane progress, rumors of trouble trickled in from the edges of Broken Spur. Silas Barnes brooded in the saloons at night, nursing resentment and whiskey. He spoke openly of wanting to break Lucas McGinty, bragging he would show the upstart who truly owned the town. Lucas braced for confrontation. One afternoon, Lucas stepped into the local telegraph office, hoping to send a message to an old acquaintance about possible ranch work. Inside, he overheard talk about Wyatt Earp possibly arriving in Broken Spur within the next few weeks. Earp was rumored to be investigating a series of robberies and murders along the stagecoach routes. Fear flickered in Lucas's chest. If Earp discovered his past misdeeds, well, that would put an end to any hope of building a life here. That evening, after Clara had returned from Miss Addie's shop, Lucas found her in their small room, carefully folding a dress she was mending for a client. He watched her for a moment, trying to find the right words. She glanced up. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "I've heard that Wyatt Earp might come to town." Her eyes widened. The name held weight even for those new to the frontier. She didn't know everything about Lucas's history, but she sensed his restlessness. "He's a famous lawman," she said softly. "Does that worry you, Lucas?" Forced a grin, but it lacked humor. "Yes, I've done things in my past. If Earp catches wind, I'll be locked away. Or worse." Clara set the dress aside and scooted closer to him. Her small hand reached out hesitantly, touching his arm. "Tell me," she said, her voice trembling, but determined. "What did you do?" In that moment, Lucas felt the burden of his secrets way heavier than any saddlebag he'd carried. He drew a deep breath. "I was 17 when I shot my first man. He was a drifter, tried to rob my family's homestead. I wanted to protect my ma and sisters. That part was justified. But later, I fell into bad company. Rode with a band of outlaws. Did some robberies roughing folks up. Even after I left them, bounty hunters tried to collect me. I killed a few in self-defense. My face ended up on wanted posters across 3 states. I tried to bury that past by drifting, but the law always lurked." A silence settled between them, broken only by the faint creaking of the floorboards in the boarding house. Clara's expression was unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "People can change," she said. "I'm not excusing your past, but I've seen how you treat me, how you respect Mrs. Gardner, how you help around town." Lucas's eyes slid shut. "I want to believe I can be better," he whispered. "But if Earp catches me, or if Silas tries something to provoke me, I'm afraid I'll revert to the only way I know how to survive." Clara's hand squeezed his arm gently. "You don't have to face it alone," she said. A quiet strength resonated in her words. "We'll figure this out together." In that moment, Lucas realized that his shy bride was not as fragile as she seemed, and that gave him hope. Not every day was calm. Tensions reached a boiling point one evening, not long after the talk with Clara. Lucas had taken a side job delivering supplies to the Dry Gulch Ranch, several miles out of town. He returned late, dusty and tired, only to find a commotion brewing outside Mrs. Gardner's boarding house. A small group had gathered a few local drunks, a ranch hand or two. Silas Barnes stood in the center cane in hand, towering over Clara, who was cowering against the boarding house steps. Moonlight gleamed off Silas's twisted sneer. "You think you can hide behind that scoundrel," Silas taunted. "I offered good money for you, girl. You belong to me." Clara glared at him, though her voice quaked with fear. "I belong to no one." Silas raised his cane threateningly. "One day, you'll regret choosing that outlaw." Mark my words. That was when Lucas stepped in, calmly inserting himself between Silas and Clara. "She belongs to no one but herself," he said in a cold, controlled voice. "Now back off." A hush fell. Silas winced Lucas up, but refused to step back. "You think you're tough, McGinty. I've heard the stories about you." "I don't want any trouble," Lucas replied. "But if you harm her, you'll regret it." Silas chuckled a dark, hollow sound. "You planning to shoot me down in the street like a dog? That's what outlaws do, right?" Anger crackled in Lucas's eyes. Clara clutched his sleeve, her trembling fingers a silent plea for peace. He forced himself to remain calm. "Go home, Barnes. This ends here." Silas slammed his cane on the ground. "Nothing ends until I say it does." He leaned in. "Watch your back, McGinty. And your pretty little bride's, too." He turned on his heel and marched away, his entourage stumbling after him. The small crowd that had gathered dispersed quickly, not wanting to be caught in the middle. Lucas turned to Clara, who exhaled shakily. Mrs. Gardner bustled out, taking Clara's arm and scolding her for confronting Silas alone. "You should have come inside at the first sign of trouble, dear," she fussed. "He cornered me as I was coming home from the shop," Clara explained, voice trembling. "I tried to brush him off, but he wouldn't listen." Lucas's jaw tightened. "He won't stop," he muttered. "I'll have to watch him carefully." That night, Lucas lay awake on the floor of their room, the faint glow of the oil lamp casting shadows on the walls. He could see Clara's form tucked beneath the blanket. The soft rise and fall of her breathing was the only sign of peace he could cling to. He realized that his presence was both her protection and her greatest danger. If Silas Barnes didn't break her spirit, the lawmen might well break hers and Lucas's fledgling life apart. As the town clock tolled midnight, he wondered if there was truly a way to outrun his past and keep Clara safe. In the weeks that followed, Silas kept his distance physically, but he cast a dark shadow over the town. His voice, sharp and venomous, continued to slither into saloons and corner conversations. Word reached Lucas that Silas was hiring extra ranch hands, tough men, who had no qualms about using violence to settle disputes. Amid this tension, Clara and Lucas found moments of quiet solace. One crisp evening they escaped to a spot on the outskirts of Broken Spur, a small clearing near a bend in the creek. Cottonwood trees rustled in the breeze, and the sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. They sat side by side on a fallen log, a small fire crackling before them. Clara, finally free from the demands of the sewing shop, wore a peaceful expression. She gently tucked a stray hair behind her ear and looked at Lucas. "Have you always lived like this?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Worried that trouble might be around every corner. Lucas exhaled, tossing a twig into the flames. "Not always," he admitted. "As a boy, I had a normal family life. We had a small farm. My ma was religious, believed in the Lord's mercy. My pa was stern but caring. We struggled, but we were happy enough. What happened to them?" He paused, swallowing back a lump in his throat. Pa died when I was young, a farming accident. My ma and sisters moved to a smaller place to get by. I worked odd jobs until the day came. I had to defend them from some marauders. Killed one, got a taste of what a gun could do. After that, I kept drifting, falling in with bad folks. Lost contact with my family. By the time I tried to find them, my ma had passed on, and my sisters married and moved away. Sympathy pooled in Clara's eyes, tears threatening to fall. She reached for his hand. "I'm sorry." Lucas gave a half shrug, failing to hide the pain etched in his features. "It is what it is. You should know. That's why I've done what I've done. I wasn't born an outlaw. Life pushed me there." A gentle silence followed as they watched sparks from the fire swirl into the twilight sky. Then Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my parents too. My pa died in the war. My ma was swindled out of our home by a man who claimed he'd pay our debts. We ended up on the streets. After my ma passed, I was taken in by a boarding house in Denver, but I never really felt safe. Then a man approached me about a position as a housekeeper in Broken Spur. She gave a sad smile. Ended up being sold at that awful auction. I guess I should have known better." Lucas's heart twisted. He hated that the West could be so cruel to women like Clara. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "We'll make something of ourselves," he said. "I promise I won't let you face anything like that again." Their eyes met a moment of unspoken understanding passing between them. In the quiet hush of the creek's current and the crackle of the fire, Lucas felt closer to her than he'd ever felt to anyone else. The cynic in him tried to argue that it wouldn't last, that trouble would come. But for that night beneath the stars, he allowed himself to believe in hope. The next few days were marked by the town's anxious anticipation of Wyatt Earp's arrival. Whispers circulated about him, making a swing through Broken Spur to assess the local troublemakers. Some said he was traveling with Doc Holliday, though others scoffed at that rumor. Either way, the tension grew. One morning, while Lucas was hauling crates outside the general store, a stagecoach rattled down the main street. It stopped in front of the saloon, and out stepped two men. The first was tall, with a coat draped over his shoulders and a wide-brimmed hat that partially obscured a stern, weathered face. The second was lean, with sharp eyes and an almost casual stance, carrying a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Are those Earp's men?" Clara whispered as she approached Lucas on her lunch break. She had spotted the commotion. Her hands nervously fidgeted with the hem of her apron. Lucas narrowed his eyes, observing from a distance. "Could be," he muttered. "We'll know soon enough." As if on cue, the tall man peeled away from the stagecoach driver and strolled purposefully into the saloon. The lean fellow followed. The townspeople loitering on the boardwalk parted like water for them. Clara clutched Lucas's arm, her eyes wide. "Should we run?" The instinct to flee clashed with his resolve to stay. If he ran, he'd be a fugitive for sure. If he stayed, maybe he could pass as just another worker in town, especially if Earp wasn't specifically looking for him. "No," Lucas said quietly. "Running would confirm any suspicions. We keep our heads down. Don't cause trouble." So they did. Over the next few hours, Broken Spur buzzed with speculation. The tall man's name turned out to be Deputy Marshal Raymond Clay from Dodge City, and the lean man was Deputy James Carter. They were not Wyatt Earp, but they were a part of a larger contingent of lawmen sweeping the territories, investigating crimes connected to stagecoach robberies and murders. Word had it that Wyatt Earp himself was overseeing the operation from farther north. Possibly. Tombstone, possibly. Dodge City. No one seemed sure. Deputy Clay wasted no time calling a town meeting in the saloon. Lucas and Clara stood in the back, quietly observing. Silas Barnes was near the front, practically bristling with anticipation. "We're here to put an end to illegal activity," Deputy Clay announced in a booming voice. "We have a list of known outlaws. If any of you are harboring criminals, now's the time to speak up. We will not hesitate to bring them to justice." A hush fell. Lucas tried to blend into the crowd, pulling his hat low, but he caught Silas Barnes eyeing him smugly. Deputy Clay continued, "We'll be in Broken Spur for a few weeks, investigating the stage robberies. Anyone with information, come forward. The law is here to protect you, not harm you." The irony of that statement weighed heavily on Lucas, who knew that to these lawmen, he was just another piece of scum to sweep out of the territory. He cast a sideways glance at Clara. She looked pale, but kept her composure. After the meeting dispersed, Silas approached Deputy Clay, quietly whispering something while glancing back at Lucas. Lucas's blood ran cold. He could imagine Silas spinning a tale, setting the lawman on Lucas's trail. He resisted the urge to storm out of the saloon. Instead, he kept calm, determined not to let Silas see any fear. That night, Clara found Lucas pacing in their room at Mrs. Gardner's. She gently cupped his cheek. "We should go," she whispered, "before it's too late." Lucas closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. The thought of running again sapped his spirit. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder," he said. "I want to be free of this." She paused, searching his eyes. "What if we find a way to clear your name? Maybe those outlaws you ran with were behind the stagecoach robberies. If you helped the law catch them." He snorted. "That's a dangerous game. Those men are ruthless, and the law might lock me up anyway." Clara's voice softened. "I believe in you," she said. "I believe you can find a way to end this, to start fresh." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Fear and longing warred in his heart. He dared to dream of a future where they could live peacefully. No more auctions, no more wanted posters. But the path to redemption often led straight through hell. The following day, Lucas resolved to test the waters. He quietly approached Deputy Carter as he was questioning townspeople about any strange recent activity. Deputy Carter gave Lucas a once-over, noticing the pistol at his hip and the hardened cast to his jaw. "Something you want to share?" Carter asked, leaning against a hitching post. Lucas measured his words. "Heard you're investigating stagecoach robberies. I might have information." Carter's eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" "Name's Lucas McGinty. I used to ride with a gang near Deadwood. They were into robberies, among other things." Carter's posture tensed, but he kept his voice neutral. "Is that so?" Lucas nodded. "If they're the ones behind the robberies you're looking into, maybe we can help each other. I provide leads. You help me. Come clean." Carter's lips thinned. "You want amnesty?" "Something like that," Lucas said, carefully. "I've done wrong, but I'm trying to start a new life." Carter contemplated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "Marshal Clay is the one to speak to. But if you're lying or trying to trick us, you'll hang. Understand?" Lucas nodded grimly. "I understand." Carter called over Marshal Clay, who approached with the stern authority of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. Lucas repeated his offer. He had knowledge of a notorious gang that might be linked to the stagecoach hits. In exchange, he wanted a chance to clear his name. Clay eyed him as though peering into his soul. "If you're serious," Clay said, "you'll come with us on a hunt. Show us where they might hide, how to approach them. If we catch them and find your story checks out, maybe we can work something out. But I make no promises. You so much as blink wrong, and I'll gun you down." "Clear." Lucas swallowed hard. "Clear." Clara waited anxiously at the boarding house, pacing until she heard the click of the front door. Lucas stepped inside, weariness radiating from every pore. "Did you do it?" she asked, eyes wide. He nodded, removing his hat. "I offered them my help to catch the gang I used to ride with. If it pans out, maybe I'll get a chance at amnesty." Clara's hands flew to her mouth. "That's dangerous." "It is," he admitted, sinking into a chair. "Those men won't hesitate to kill me if they see me coming with the law." He glanced at her, noting the fear in her eyes. "But it's the only way I see us having a real future." She knelt beside him, taking his hand in both of hers. "Then I'm with you," she murmured, voice resolute. "Whatever it takes." Lucas brushed a kiss to her forehead. In that small gesture, he found the strength he needed. He was willing to risk everything, his life, his freedom, if it meant a chance at redemption with Clara by his side. Over the next week, Lucas quietly prepared for a confrontation with his old gang. He gave Marshal Clay and Deputy Carter the location of a hidden canyon near the Badlands, where the gang once holed up. The lawmen gathered a small posse of trusted men to make the journey. Lucas insisted on joining them as only he could guide them through the labyrinth of canyons and ravines. Clara insisted on coming too, but Lucas refused. "It's too dangerous," he told her, tightening the saddle on his horse. "Stay here with Mrs. Gardner. If all goes well, I'll be back in a week." Tears brimmed in Clara's eyes, but she nodded. She placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Come back to me," she whispered. Lucas gave a stiff nod, then turned to mount his horse. The posse set off at dawn. The journey took them through arid plains, over rocky ridges, and past ghostly rock formations that stood like sentinels in the desert. Each night they camped under the stars. The lawmen kept close watch on Lucas, never fully trusting him. As the fifth day dawned, they drew near the canyon. Tensions ran high. Lucas pointed out vantage points and pitfalls, recalling how his former comrades would often place lookouts along the ridgelines. Marshal Clay gave instructions, splitting the posse into flanking groups to box the gang in. When they finally reached the mouth of the canyon, the lawmen took cover behind boulders. Dust swirled in the heated wind. Lucas's heart pounded. Memories flooded back of the times he'd hidden in these same rocks, laughing with men who had become devils. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the ridges. One of the deputies cried out, struck in the shoulder. A wave of chaos broke over the posse. Lucas recognized a face peering over a rock rifle aimed Jack Red McCready, one of his old crew. Red let out a curse when he saw Lucas. "You traitor," he bellowed, opening fire. Bullets ricocheted off rocks. Marshal Clay and Deputy Carter barked orders, returning fire. Lucas quickly scrambled behind a large boulder, cursing himself. He had led them right into a prepared ambush. The canyon echoed with the roar of gunfire. Dust choked the air, and the acrid smell of spent cartridges burned Lucas's nostrils. He risked a glance around the corner, spotting 4 or 5 of his old gang members, each armed and scattered among the rocks. McGinty, a voice, shouted from somewhere above, "You come back to die with the law dogs." Lucas recognized it as Deke Truman, the gang's leader. A ruthless man with a scar slashed across his face. Lucas knew Deke would never surrender peacefully. Marshal Clay motioned for Lucas to circle around the left flank. "If you really want redemption," Clay growled, "help us box them in." Lucas took a deep breath and skirted around boulders, keeping low. His heart thumped like a war drum. He recalled every twist and turn of the canyon. With careful steps, he crept behind a rock ledge overlooking the main firefight. From this vantage, he spotted Deke crouched behind a fallen tree trunk with 2 men. Summoning courage, Lucas aimed his revolver. He fired off a shot that nicked the trunk, sending splinters flying. The gang members jerked back. Clay and Carter used the distraction to advance, cornering them. More gunfire rattled the canyon walls. One of the gang men tried to flee. A deputy tackled him, wrestling him to the ground. Another lawman was struck in the leg by a stray bullet, collapsing with a cry. The firefight raged until finally Deke's ammunition ran low. Deke stood trying to bolt, but found himself face to face with Lucas. Their eyes locked. Time seemed to freeze. The memory of riding side by side, sharing stolen whiskey, flickered through Lucas's mind. Then Deke snarled, drawing a knife. He lunged. Lucas fired. The bullet struck Deke in the chest, sending him staggering back. The knife clattered onto the rocks. Deke's eyes widened in shock. "Damn you, McGinty," he rasped, collapsing to the ground. Silence fell except for the moans of the wounded. The gang was subdued. Red McCready lay face down, wounded in the shoulder. 2 others had surrendered, dropping their weapons. Marshal Clay and Deputy Carter moved in, securing the area. Lucas stood, gun still smoking, staring at Deke's lifeless form. A wave of grief and relief swirled within him. He had betrayed his old gang, but in doing so he might have saved himself and countless others from further brutality. Marshal Clay walked over, panting heavily. "You did it," Clay said, eyes scanning the carnage. "This is them all right. We've been chasing these devils for months." Lucas felt hollow. "Does that mean my name is cleared?" Clay was silent for a moment, wiping sweat from his brow. "We'll have to verify your story, but you've helped us a great deal. I'll put in a good word with the higher-ups. I can't promise a pardon, but I'll do my damnedest." Lucas looked down at his blood-spattered hands, remembering the day he'd paid $100 to save a frightened young woman. This blood was different. This was the final reckoning with his past. "That's all I ask," he said softly. And with that, the canyon fell quiet, the echoes of gunshots drifting away on the desert wind. The posse and their captives returned to Broken Spur, battered but victorious. The townspeople gathered to watch the lawmen escort the captured outlaws to the local jailhouse, which had been hastily improved with steel bars for the occasion. Lucas limped slightly, having twisted his ankle during the skirmish. Deputy Carter helped him off his horse, giving a respectful nod. "You're the real deal, McGinty," he murmured. "I never thought I'd say that." Marshal Clay posted a telegram immediately detailing their success to the federal marshals. He assured Lucas that if the territories recognized his cooperation, they might offer leniency or a full pardon for any outstanding warrants. It wasn't a sure thing, but it was more hope than Lucas ever had. Clara rushed to meet him outside the jailhouse, tears of relief sliding down her cheeks. "You're alive." She embraced him tightly, ignoring the stares of curious onlookers. Lucas pressed his face into her hair. "It's over," he whispered. "Mostly, anyway." Silas Barnes stood across the street, watching with a scowl. He spat on the ground, clearly irritated that Lucas had returned a hero in the eyes of some. The old rancher vanished into the nearest saloon, no doubt plotting his next move. As the lawmen prepared to depart for Dodge City with their prisoners, Marshal Clay pulled Lucas aside. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. You coming with us to finalize your statement?" Lucas glanced at Clara, who looked uneasy at the thought of them being separated so soon. "I'll go, but I want to bring my wife. She deserves to see this through." Clay shrugged. "Fine by me. Just don't run off. If you do, we'll hunt you down." Lucas nodded. "I'm done running." That night in their small room at Mrs. Gardner's, Clara helped Lucas clean the grime of travel from his face and bandage a scrape on his arm. The intimacy of her gentle care filled him with warmth. He caught her hand, pressing it to his heart. "You saved me," he murmured. She shook her head, tears sparkling in her eyes. "No. You chose this. I only believed in you." He pulled her closer, his eyes reflecting the tenderness he felt. Sometimes that's all a man needs, someone to believe in him. They fell asleep side by side on the bed. For the first time, the boundary of the floor no longer required. Their quiet breathing mingled in the soft darkness, two souls no longer quite so lost. Lucas and Clara traveled with Marshal Clay's party to Dodge City. The journey was long and rough. The outlaw captives watched closely. Clara stayed close to Lucas, quiet but observant, absorbing the vastness of the open plains. When they arrived, Dodge City pulsed with energy, saloons, railroads, and lawmen everywhere. Clay led them to a plain government building where a federal judge and several officials waited. To Lucas's surprise, among them stood the legendary Wyatt Earp, eyes sharp beneath a polished hat. Beside him was a thinner man with a chronic cough, Doc Holliday, if whispers were true. "This the man Earp?" asked Clay, nodding at Lucas. Clay confirmed it. Earp gave Lucas a once-over. "Your name used to be on wanted posters." Lucas met his gaze. "I was part of that life. Not anymore." Judge Morton called the hearing to order. Lucas gave a full statement, his past crimes, his role in leading the law to the Badlands gang, and his effort to start anew. Clara clutched his hand tightly. Clay and Carter vouched for Lucas. Even Doc Holliday gave a casual nod of approval. A man who helps take down killers might not be one himself, he drawled. The judge was quiet, thoughtful. Then he spoke, "Lucas McGinty. The court acknowledges your contribution. You are placed under probationary watch for 6 months. If you remain lawful, your record will be cleared." Clara gasped softly. Lucas exhaled, his heart finally light. "Thank you. I won't waste this." Earp shook Lucas's hand. "You've chosen a hard path. Stay on it. This territory needs more men like you." Outside, the air felt lighter. Lucas looked at Clara, her eyes gleaming with pride. Whatever came next, they had earned a second chance, and this time they wouldn't let it slip away. Lucas and Clara returned to Broken Spur with cautious hope. News of Lucas's cooperation with the law spread quickly. Some still eyed him with suspicion, but others offered respectful nods. They left Mrs. Gardner's boarding house and moved into a small cabin on the outskirts of town rented from Jeb Mulligan. It was humble, 2 rooms and a fireplace, but it was theirs. A home built not from desperation, but from quiet determination. Clara transformed the space, scrubbing floors, sewing curtains and making it warm. Lucas hunted chopped wood and took odd jobs to keep food on the table. Together they built a partnership rooted in trust. But peace was never certain. Silas Barnes lurked, trying to sabotage Clara's job and find men to harm Lucas. Yet Miss Addie defended Clara, and few dared cross a man now watched by federal law. One morning, Mrs. Gardner sent word she was ill. Lucas and Clara rushed to town and found her bedridden, pale with fever. A traveling doctor had stopped by, but there was little he could do. They took shifts by her side, keeping her warm, feeding her soup, whispering comfort. "You've come so far," she murmured to Clara, gripping her hand. After 2 tense days, her fever finally broke. Relief flooded them. Mrs. Gardner smiled weakly. "Guess I'm too stubborn to go just yet." Back at the cabin, Lucas and Clara sat by the fire, exhausted. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being here. For saving me. For choosing this life." He kissed her temple. "You gave me a reason to." And in that quiet moment, with firelight flickering and peace settling, it felt like they'd truly come home. Life had settled, but Silas Barnes's bitterness only deepened. One quiet afternoon, Clara was walking home from Miss Addie's shop when Silas appeared reeking of whiskey. He grabbed her arm and dragged her into a narrow alley. "You think you're safe now," he hissed. "You should have been mine." Clara dropped the fabric she'd been carrying, struggling. "Let me go." He slammed her against the wall. "I paid for you. You belong to me." Before he could do more, Lucas appeared at the alley's mouth. His voice thundered. "Get your hands off my wife." Silas turned, sneering. "Bought and paid for like cattle." Lucas lunged, knocking Silas back hard. Silas stumbled, then drew a knife. Lucas punched him, sending the blade flying. Clara fell to the ground, sobbing. Silas' blood trickling from his lip taunted Lucas. "Go ahead. Shoot me. Prove you're still an outlaw." Lucas froze, gun raised. The old rage swelled, but Clara's cries cut through it. He exhaled shakily and lowered the weapon. "You're not worth it." Deputy Carter and several townsfolk rushed in. "What's going on?" Lucas gestured to Silas. He attacked Clara. Silas, still reeling, shouted, "She's mine!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Carter scowled. "That's not how the law works." 2 deputies grabbed Silas, dragging him away as he cursed and thrashed. Clara, trembling, clung to Lucas. He wrapped his arms around her protectively. Carter nodded at Lucas. "You did the right thing." As Silas disappeared behind bars, Lucas knew he'd passed a final test. He had protected Clara without losing himself. Clara looked up at him, tears glistening but smiling. He gently wiped them away. "You didn't have to pull that trigger to prove anything," she whispered. Lucas held her close. "I didn't need to, because I'm not that man anymore." Silas Barnes's arrest marked a turning point. His influence in Broken Spur faded as his ranch crumbled and allies vanished. Though he posted bail, the town no longer feared him. His trial loomed, but his power was broken. Lucas, still under probation, remained a model citizen. Townsfolk who once eyed him warily now nodded in passing. Some even thanked him for helping rid the town of Silas and the Badlands gang. Clara flourished at Miss Addie's shop, now trusted with custom dressmaking. No longer the shy auction bride, she walked with confidence, hand in hand with Lucas, her smile meeting every curious glance. Then came the telegram. Marshal Clay delivered the news the federal marshals had reviewed Lucas's case. If he continued to keep the peace, a full pardon would be granted in 6 months. To celebrate, Clara and Lucas invited a few close friends to their cabin. Mrs. Gardner brought biscuits. Jeb brought cider, and Miss Addie arrived in a scarf Clara had sewn. Even Deputy Carter stopped by to congratulate them. They shared laughter and food. When the guests departed, Clara and Lucas sat on the porch beneath a starlit sky. 6 months until your name is clear, Clara whispered. What then? Lucas smiled. Then we build something new. Maybe a family. Clara blushed, nodding. In the quiet, he held her close, knowing their love had turned a painful past into the beginning of something whole. Months passed peacefully. Lucas worked honest jobs, stayed out of trouble, and quietly earned the town's respect. Clara, once timid, bloomed into a beloved figure in Broken Spur, known for her needlework kindness and quiet strength. Children gravitated to her, and neighbors waved when she passed. Then the long-awaited letter arrived. Lucas was summoned to town hall for the formal pardon. Clara dressed in a modest, elegant gown she'd sewn herself. Lucas wore his best shirt, and the coat he once inherited, a symbol of the past he was about to shed. Inside the town hall, familiar faces filled the room. Mrs. Gardner, Jeb, Miss Addie, Deputy Carter, and more. Marshal Clay presented Lucas's case, his cooperation in capturing the Badlands gang, and 6 months of lawful living. The circuit judge, solemn and fair, read the decree. Lucas McGinty, you are hereby pardoned of your prior offenses. May you continue to serve peace and prosperity. A wave of applause followed. Lucas stood stunned. Clara squeezed his hand, tears shining in her eyes. You did it, she whispered. No, he replied softly. We did. Outside, the sun shone bright over Broken Spur. Lucas looked down the road he'd once arrived on a haunted man with blood on his hands. Now he walked it hand in hand with Clara free redeemed, and finally home. Thank you for joining us on this Wild West journey of grit, danger, and ultimately hope. Lucas McGinty, the hardened outlaw with a shadowed past, found in Clara not just a bride, but a guiding light toward redemption. Together they faced marauding gangs, vengeful ranchers, and the ever-looming presence of the law. Through trials by gunfire and courtroom judgments, their bond deepened, proving that even in the harshest deserts, and forgiveness can flourish like desert flowers after the rain. If this story stirred your soul, if you felt the dust of the plains, the clang of bullets on stone, and the longing for a second chance, please show your support. Like this video, share it with others who love a good frontier drama, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories. Ride with us again into the sunset of another unforgettable tale. Your support keeps these legends alive. Thank you, partners.